Hello everyone, and welcome to the final parts of the Un'Goro reviews. We're going to be doing Warlock now. This is a class I'm pretty excited about going into Un'Goro. I think the dominant Warlock archetypes are mostly going to be Zoo archetypes, but there's actually some other interesting decks I'm looking forward to. First off, we're going to start with the quest as per usual. The usual disclaimer, this is all pre-Un'Goro release, so we're going to be rating cards on a scale of 1 to 5 for flavor and viability. So starting off with Licari Sacrifice, the quest for Warlock. The quest is to discard 6 cards, and the reward is the Nether Portal. So the Nether Portal is a 5-mana portal that summons 2 3/2 imps either side of it every turn. The reward is pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of value in the Nether Portal. Getting 6/4 stats every turn without actually having to do anything is a great way for Zoo decks, or just any decks, to sort of outvalue other control decks in the late game. It sort of even competes with Jade in a way when it comes to value, because you don't even have to draw a card or play anything to actually get that value. So you're getting free value plus whatever you actually do in your turn. So obviously it's a lot of value. The quest, to achieve this, you have to discard 6 cards. So discarding cards is something we've seen a bit in discard Warlock Zoo decks a bit. But discarding 6 cards is a little bit tough. Traditionally, even the discard decks have usually only played double Soulfire, double Doomguard, and sometimes the Darkshire Librarians. So actually getting to 6 discards is not that easy, because you actually have to discard a card when you play this. Often you play Doomguard with an empty hand and don't discard anything, and then that wouldn't count towards the Licari Sacrifice. So you have to give up a fair amount of card advantage, and therefore indirectly life, because you're going to have to tap to replace those cards, which is also giving up tempo. You have to give up quite a lot in order to actually get there for the Licari Sacrifice. So I kind of only see it being good in control metas, for a way for Zoo to tech to make sure that they can actually win against control decks. Having the Nether Portal against something like Control Warrior or even like Freeze Mage could provide you a lot of value. Not that Freeze Mage will be a thing rarely going into Un'Goro with Ice Lance rotating out, but those matchups where Zoo can struggle in the late game. The Licari Sacrifice, I feel like, is going to be a bit of a tech card for that. So without even looking at the other cards in the set, I'm actually just going to straight up, or without reviewing the cards, I'm going to straight up rate Licari Sacrifice now. I think it's a 3 for viability, because it really is going to be more of a tech card than a absolute include in every deck, in every Zoo deck, I think. Maybe there's going to be some more control discard lock decks, but the problem with that is that if you want to play a control game, you really need to outvalue your opponent for card advantage, and if you're not actually getting card advantage over your opponent because you're discarding 6 cards, which is a fifth of your deck, then it's going to be a bit tricky to actually get the win like that. So Licari Sacrifice is a 3 for viability, and I'm going to give it a 3 for flavor. I'm not the biggest fan of the discard mechanic as a Warlock mechanic. I might have liked to see something like every time you inflict damage on yourself kind of thing. That would have been an interesting way of doing the quest, especially with some of the cards that we're seeing in this set. I think that might have been a bit more interesting, because I'm not sure Zoo actually needs this, so I'm not sure this is going to be the best kind of quest to play. It is definitely an interesting tech card, and it makes Zoo stronger even if it's not in the deck, because it's something that Zoo can put in the deck to have value in control matchups. Okay, so let's look at the other legendary, also on the discard theme here, and that's Clutchmother Zavas. So Clutchmother Zavas is a 2-mana 2/2 beast, because beasts matter in Warlock apparently. Whenever you discard this, give it +2/+2 and return it to your hand. So if you played Soulfire on 1 for some unknown reason and discarded Clutch Mother Zavas, you could get it out as a 2-mana 4/4 on turn 2. But realistically, Clutch Mother Zavas is almost always going to be a late game play. You're going to probably play this after playing your Doom Guards, maybe your Licari Fellhounds if you're playing them, your Soulfires, your Darkshire Librarians, sorry. I expect this to generally come down at 4/4 to 6/6, but sometimes you are going to just play it as a 2-mana 4/4 alongside some other stuff, as you flood the board with Zoo, and that's pretty good. One of the biggest assets of Clutch Mother Zavas is that because she comes back to your hand every time you discard her, it's a way of fueling the quest. We were talking about the quest being a bit difficult because you actually lose the cards in your hand and sometimes you just run out of cards to discard. Well, Clutch Mother Zavas helps to solve that problem, but just keeping her in your hand just to fulfill the quest can be a bit weak. When she's a 2-mana 6/6, a 2-mana 8/8, you want to slam that down on the board and take advantage of that. And that's why I think it's not necessarily going to just be the one card that allows the discard deck to work in terms of the quest version, but I do think it's going to be very strong in any discard orientated zoos. So I think Clutch Mother Zavas I'm going to give a 4 out of 5 for viability. I think it's a pretty strong card as long as discard zoo is a thing, and I think it will be because of the strength of Doom Guard, quite frankly, and the huge tempo you get with Silverware Golem when you manage to discard it. If that deck is a thing, then I definitely think Clutch Mother Zavas will see a lot of play. And I'm going to give Clutch Mother Zavas a 5 for flavor, because I really like the idea that you actually get something back when you discard the card, rather than it just being kind of a Silverware Golem thing where you feel super lucky and you completely cheat out the mana. Now you're sort of banking some value for later turns, and obviously your opponent will be able to keep track of the Clutch Mother Zavas, so they can play around it to a certain extent too. And that's nice because it adds more skillful interactions with the discard, rather than discard just being like, oh, I randomly discarded Silverware Golem. Cool, now deal with that because I just played Doomguard and Silverware Golem on turn 5. And then you're like, well, that's a lot of stats. So yeah, I really like the way they've done Clutch Mother Zavas. Sometimes you will end up discarding her and then playing her in the same turn as maybe a 4/4 or a pretty much a 4/4 in that case. And sure, that's a relative surprise, but I think most of the time you're going to know when that Clutch Mother Zavas is coming and you're going to be able to prepare for it. And that's a nice thing to see from both sides of the player's perspective, I feel. And then next we have Chittering Tunneler. This is a 3-mana 3/3 beast. Once again, a beast. But I mean, a lot of the minions in this set are beasts. So it's not really surprising that we see even Beeston Warlock now. So Chittering Tunneler, a 3-mana 3/3 beast with Battlecry, discover a spell, deal damage to your hero equal to its cost. So if you're getting those 1-mana spells, like Soulfire or in Wild, Power Overwhelming, then Chittering Tunneler is a better Dark Peddler, but a lot of the time you're going to be offered bigger, clunkier spells. Warlock doesn't really have the best spells. They have a lot of really clunky spells, and I'm not sure this is really going to work in any decks. You would kind of see this maybe in like a Control Warlock, but Reno Lock is going to be a thing of the past. The Warlocks just really don't have a good way to regenerate health. They certainly haven't been given any tools in this expansion to heal up, so I think Chittering Tunneler is going to be a bit weak. The 3/3 body for 3 is not that great, but we are seeing more 3/3s that for 3 that actually give you something as well, like the Curious Glimmerroot and Priest, and like the Terrascale Stalker and Hunter, that have powerful effects if they work well for you, but aren't the best stat line necessarily on 3. So Chittering Tunneler, I'm going to have to give a 2 for viability. I don't really see this card seeing play, certainly not at the moment. If in the future we do get some better healing mechanics for Warlock, then Chittering Tunneler might find its way into some Control Warlock decks. And I'm going to give it a 3 for flavor. I do like, actually a 4 for flavor. I like the fact that the more powerful things you discover, the more sort of cost you have to pay for them. It makes those really like nuts discovers a little bit more of a choice. Like you don't just always take Twisting Nether because that's like high value, or Siphon Soul because that's high value, because you have to worry about, well, what can they actually do to me in the turn that I now take 6 damage? Am I going to put myself in lethal range? Do I have to maybe take the slightly lower value card in order to not die? And on the taking damage to play spells theme, we have Blood Bloom. So this is a Warlock spell, 2 mana. The next spell you cast this turn costs health instead of mana. So I think this is a very powerful effect. I think a lot of the time it can be like a stronger innovate, specifically for spells. So a little bit like a prep, really, in that, but you have to lose a bunch of health as well, instead of just losing an extra card, right? So Blood Bloom is, I think, has potential, but I don't think its time is now. I think that the Warlock spells, as we kind of mentioned with Tutoring Center, are a bit weak, and none of them are really worth it for Blood Bloom. If you're facing like some aggro rush, then going like Blood Bloom and Twisting Nether isn't actually that good, because you are taking 8 life. You have to be removing a fair amount of stuff off the board, probably over 10 or 12 attack worth of stuff off the board, to actually make that a good or like beneficial trade for you. So Blood Bloom is a bit awkward at the moment, I think. Probably one of the better spells to cheat out with it would be something like a Bane of Doom, but then you actually have to be running Bane of Doom, and I think that's a bit iffy. So for Blood Bloom, I'm going to give it a 2 for viability, only because I think it, well, I'm not giving it a 1 because I think it might see play in the future. I just don't think it has a place now, a little bit like Chittering Tunnel. And I'm going to give it a 3 for flavor. I like the health mechanic. Actually, I'm going to give it a 4 for flavor. I like the fact that it's making you pay a little bit more and think twice, sort of, to get the really powerful spells and effects using it. You know, a little bit like I spoke about with Chittering Tunnel. Next we have Cruel Dynamancer. This is a 6 mana 5/5 Death Rattle. Summon a random minion you discarded this game. So interesting interaction will be how this works with Clutch Mother Zavas. I'm not quite sure if when you discard, at what power level she would be. So because you discard her at like 2/2 the first time, I imagine if if she was the only thing that you discarded and Cruel Dynamancer died, then he would bring back Clutch Mother Zavas as a 2/2 instead of a 4/4. And then if you discard her the next time as a 4/4, I'd imagine she would possibly come back as a 4/4. But anyway, overall, I think Cruel Dynamancer is a little bit weak. It's a little bit slow of a tempo play. It kind of screams like Control Discard Lock. Like there's some crazy things you could do if you discarded like Jaraxxus, or in Wild if you discarded Morganus, and then you got those off your Cruel Dynamancer, or like Noggin Fogger in Noggin Fogger Zoo. But overall, I don't think Cruel Dynamancer is that great. I think the fact that it's a Death Rattle makes it awkward. If it was a Battle Cry, you would have a chance to get that like split stat body that would be somewhat similar to Faceless Summoner, the Mage card. But I think this is just going to be a little bit slow and really just doesn't have the right deck at the moment. I don't think that on average you're going to want to play this in Discard Zoo. I think it's probably going to get discarded more often than you actually get to play it and get its Death Rattle off. Obviously, if you do discard this and then get it back with itself, then I imagine you could theoretically go infinite for Cruel Dynamancers, which is obviously ridiculous value. You know, so if you discard the first one, play the second one, that one dies, brings back the first one, then I assume it could bring back itself again, and that could be like just, you know, infinite value, but there's a certain amount of like RNG in that, right? You could achieve it if you exactly discard it, but that's a pretty difficult ask. You know, if you exactly only discarded the first Cruel Dynamancer. So that's interesting possibility, and definitely something we might see in some like Trollden vid or something. But I don't think Cruel Dynamancer is going to see play right now, so I'm going to give it a 2 for viability, and a 4 for flavor. I like the idea of getting value back from the cards you discarded. Obviously, the fact that it's random is a bit unfortunate, but the discard mechanic is relatively random, and they kind of would have to make it random in this case. Next we have Feeding Time. Feeding Time is a 5 mana spell, deal 3 damage to a minion, and summon 3 1/1 pterodactyls. So, at first this looks like a slightly overcosted, more consistent Implosion, but one of the big things about Implosion was when you could play it. 1 mana cost added or removed to a spell, especially a removal spell, makes a huge difference, because it makes a big difference to what the spell can actually target and how many good targets it actually has. So I think that Feeding Time is on average a fair bit worse than Implosion. I don't think it's going to be good enough for most zoo decks to play. It doesn't really fit the curve that well. I feel like it's going to get discarded a lot of time in the discard-based zoo decks. So I don't really think Feeding Time is going to be that great. Maybe in some kind of control lock, but as a weak removal. But then you've got Blast Crystal Potion, Siphon Soul, so I just don't see Feeding Time as a necessary card in that deck. So I'm going to give Feeding Time a 2 for viability, and I'm going to give it a 3 for flavor. I mean, it's a relatively uninteresting card, to be honest, but I like that they tried to add some of that, some of those tempo swingy cards, whilst keeping them a little bit more balanced than Implosion, let's say. Next we have Corrupting Mist. Corrupting Mist is a 2 mana Warlock spell. Corrupt every minion, destroy them at the start of your next turn. So this is essentially AoE corruption, or like a Doom Guard without the body that's also guaranteed. But when comparing this to Doom Guard, the biggest difference is that it doesn't stop your opponent from developing in their turn. And I think that's the one thing that kind of makes Corrupting Mist really bad to me. The fact that your opponent can still just develop whatever they want is pretty powerful. Obviously, you can also play Corrupting Mist and then develop your own stuff that won't die, but then your opponent's just going to trade all their stuff that would die into yours, and you're not actually gaining anything out of that interaction. So the fact that you just don't get that turn where you can develop on an empty board, which is what makes Doomsayer so powerful in Reno Lock, I think is going to make Corrupting Mist a bit awkward. Once again, I think that it does seem to suit kind of a control Warlock theme, but I'm not sure that's going to be a thing. There is a possibility maybe Handlock is a thing, and I'll talk about that a bit later. But maybe we can see Corrupting Mist in that list, but I'm somewhat skeptical. I'm going to have to give Corrupting Mist a 2 for viability. Once again, I think there's some future potential there, but I don't think its time is now. And for flavor, I'm going to give it a 4. I like the interesting. Essentially, it's guaranteed AoE at the cost of life. So I like that, because that is very much sticking to the Warlock's theme, where they use their life as a resource, both for removal or like resource generation. Well, using it as a resource, in this case for removal, but usually for resource generation. So I think that's interesting. It plays very much into that theme that Warlock has. And next we have Tar Loca. So Tar Loca is a 5 mana 1/7 elemental with taunt, and it has +3 attack during your opponent's turn. So very much like the other Tar cards we've seen, or the other Tar cards in the set. It's a taunt that is stronger in your opponent's turn than in yours. I think one of the general issues with these is that it makes it very difficult for you to set up favorable trades with these, because you can't take an advantageous trade during your turn because your elemental's attack is pretty weak. They're obviously just very defensive cards, and as we've kind of been mentioning, I'm not sure that the defensive control Warlock is necessarily going to be a thing. And I actually think that this wouldn't even make the cuts in the prospective Handlock deck, because I feel like that one is going for a bit of a different game plan. So I'm going to rate Tar Loca a 1 for viability. I think it would have been great in Reno Lock, but that's not going to be a deck anymore. and I'm going to rate it a 3 for flavor, just because I like the sort of tar theme overall. I do think the tar theme is a little weaker than most people think it is. I think the fact that you don't have the attack in your turn is actually a bigger disadvantage than most people think it is. So yeah, that's the tar Loca. And then we have Licari Hound. Licari Hound is a 4-mana 3/8 demon with taunt and battle cry, discard 2 cards. So 2 random cards. They haven't really usually said random, but in this case they do. So Licari Hound is kind of like a more defensive Doom Guard. Instead of having the charge and being like overstated with charge, it's overstated with taunt at the cost of having to discard cards, which if you're playing the Licari Sacrifice deck could well be an advantage more than a disadvantage. So I can definitely see a place for Licari Hound in that Licari Sacrifice deck. It's also just, more value. So if you want to take your zoo to be better in value matchups, or if you need your zoo to actually be good against aggro, you might take in Licari Hound. I've kind of found them very difficult to fit into the decks I was building for zoo that you can see above. But that is mostly because of the next card, which I've been trying to fit into those decks, and I think might be surprisingly good. And so I think Licari Hound is pretty good. I'm going to give it a 4 for playability. I think there's definitely a lot of decks that will use it, and it's definitely going to see a lot of play, especially early on, as people analyze whether having that another card that discards 2 cards is actually worth it, and whether the quest is actually any good. I think if the quest turns out to be very, very good, then Licari Hound will be in a fair amount of those decks, at least 1 copy, if not 2. Obviously, it's quite awkward because you can't really curve this into Doom Guard because you have to top deck Doom Guard, and yeah, that's a bit shitty. So I think that might be an issue for Licari Hound. So yeah, 4 for viability and 4 for flavor. I mean, apparently, whoever the Licari are, they like discarding cards. That seems to be their thing. And I like what they've done on sort of the switch up on the same kind of downside of discarding 2 cards that Doom Guard has, but instead having the more defensive version of that. And lastly, for Warlock, we have Ravenous Pterodactyl. So this is a 4-mana 4/4 beast that has Battle Cry, destroy a friendly minion to adapt twice. So the adaptations I don't think are that strong, but I think that having more than one adapt on a single minion makes it a lot more reliable to get something that's good. On this Ravenous Pterodactyl, +3 health is almost always going to be good, and then effects like taunt or stealth, stealth with attack is good, obviously. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting combinations that can make Ravenous Pterodactyl good. The biggest problem with it is finding that minion to destroy on curve, and I think that we're going to see a bit later in the neutrals. There is a new egg, 3-mana Devilsaur egg, which is 0/3 that with Death Rattle summon a 5/5 Devilsaur. So it's a little bit like a new Nerubian egg, and I think it curves perfectly into this Ravenous Pterodactyl, and that's one combo I'm very keen to try out, because I think even if your opponent is encouraged to kill your Devilsaur egg, I think they're doing you a favor on average. So I think that Ravenous Pterodactyl into Devilsaur egg is very, very strong. Obviously, you could get the Meme Dream and get Ravenous Pterodactyl as a 4-mana 7/7 with no downside in this case. And we know 4-mana 7/7s in decks that focus on controlling the board early are pretty good. So I think Ravenous Pterodactyl could be a little bit better than a lot of people are expecting, and I'm pretty excited to build some zoo decks with it. And so I'm going to give it a 4 for viability. I think it obviously competes a lot with Licari Hound for that spot, and just I don't really think you want to play both in the same deck. And I'm going to give it a 5 for flavor. I really like that they're giving it Warlock another way to sort of eat their own minions other than just Void Terror, and I think this helps to give Zoo a little bit more like value in the late game. and make use of some cards like Devil's Saw Egg in this set. That makes the deck building stuff a bit interesting. So speaking of deck building and Ravenous Pterodactyls, I have 2 decks here that have Ravenous Pterodactyls in. Firstly, let's talk about this deck. So this Warlock deck is a discard deck, but it's not running the quest. Once again, I think that the quest is more of a tech card. This is definitely a deck that could easily put the quest in the situation where it wanted to have that extra late game against control. But there are some new cards in here which are interesting. Obviously running Clutch Mother Zavas, because it is running Soulfires. The Darkshire Librarians, which I think are a bit iffy considering we're not running the quest and the way we want to curve out. I think there are definitely actually some other 2-drops we might want in that slot. And then there's Ravenous Runt, which is a 2-mana 2/2 with Battle Cry, adapt twice if you control, or if you control 2 friendly minions, adapt, sorry, not adapt twice. So I think this could be pretty strong. One of the obvious adaptations that springs to mind is Divine Shield, essentially getting like build your own mini bot. And then obviously plus health is pretty good, +1/+1 is pretty good, 2-mana 3/3. And I just think that the condition is very easy to satisfy in Zoo, so this is a card that really lends itself to Zoo. So I think Ravenous Runt is going to be pretty good in this deck. And then we've got the Devil's Saw Egg into Ravenous Pterodactyls combo, and we've also got the Defender of Arguses to sort of combo with that. I think this deck, what we're actually going to see out of the Ravenous Pterodactyls, the best deck for that, is something that goes a lot lighter on the discard theme. So probably not even running Silverwake Golems and Darkshire Librarians. A big loss for Zoo is going to be Imkang Boss, so filling that 3 slot is kind of the role I see Devil's Saw Egg as having. That's why I really like the Ravenous Pterodactyls follow-up to the Devil's Saw Egg as like a big tempo play. So we might well see this deck running a little bit differently. I think this deck is a little bit too in between the two. And I definitely think, this deck is also running double Abusive Sergeant, and Direwolf Alpha, and double Defender of Argus. And this deck even has the 1 Blood Fury potion. There's a few demon targets in this deck that are pretty good. And then there's also, obviously, the Devil's Saw Egg. It's a way to give it the +3 attack so that it can trade into something and then give you the 5/5 afterwards. It's no power overwhelming for that purpose, but it does still have some value. I was a little tempted to put Void Callers in, or Void Tears in, sorry, but I think they're a little bit clunky. I think the dream is really you grab board early, then you go Devil's Saw Egg into Ravenous Pterodactyls, and you can finish them off like that. Or at least make sure you have full board control by then. I think one of the other cards that might be good in this deck is Forbidden Ritual. Could easily replace something like the Darkshire Librarian in order to give you more targets for your Ravenous Pterodactyls. If you Forbidden Ritual, you can easily just eat one of the 1/1s, and I think that's the maximum you want to eat a lot of the time with Ravenous Pterodactyls is 1/1 worth of stats. And then it also gives you some good synergy with Direwolf Alpha and Ravenous Runt. So that's definitely one way I could see Zoo going in the less discard-based Zoos. Could even go no discard and start running Leroy again over Doomguard. But I think that Doomguard is probably just a bit stronger at the moment. Could even see, if you're going the Forbidden Ritual plan, Sea Giant Leroy version, which could definitely see play if the meta is such that a lot of decks are playing a lot of minions onto the board. Then the Sea Giant version might well be the better version. And then next we have the less discard orientated deck, the more board floody deck. So this deck is actually running the Pirate package. This is kind of the Zoo that's meant to help counter or be stronger in the matchup against Pirate Warrior. So running double Bloodsail Corsair to get out your patches and make it more clean for you to curve into your Ravenous Runt and always get its activation off. Then we've also got the Balfin Tidehunters. Gives you another little minion to eat a little bit later with the Pterodactyls, and obviously curves well if you go Balefin Tidehunter on 2, then like 1 drop and Ravenous Runt on 3 or something like that, to give your Ravenous Runt a more consistency. Just having the extra minions on board can make a big difference there. Or let's say you coin Balefin Tidehunter into Ravenous Runt. The Tidehunter might be a bit weak if Pyro Warrior is still very prevalent in the meta. The 2 1 damage or 1 health split bodies might be a little bit weak, but this is really a deck that is abusing that flooding board mechanic. Once again, Forbidden Ritual is definitely a card that could fit in this deck. Crazed Alchemist is another activator for the Devil Saw Egg. If you flip the stats, you'll just straight up kill the egg and get your 5/5, which is pretty strong. We've also got Dark Iron Dwarf in this version. And Runic Eggs as another possible target to eat, but that's also probably a little bit fringe. I think this is a deck going very heavy on the Devil Saw Egg and Ravenous Pterodactyl synergy to make that as strong as possible. And also on the Ravenous Runt. So this is going for those. If those are big enough payoffs, then this might be the way we see Zoo going, but this is like a very discard light Zoo. And then I think there is a possible sort of handlock deck running the I forgot his name, the 3 mana 4/8 plant that we'll discuss a bit later in the neutral section. I think that we could see a very defensive version with returning with Ancient of Watchers, Sun Furies, Defender of Argus, and that the new plant, because and then obviously you have your double Mountain Giants and your like Jaraxxus as a finisher. I think that there are a fair number of strong control Warlock cards that can make that work. I'm not sure it's a deck that really wants to go heavy into losing life using the Chittering Tunnelers or Blood Blooms or stuff like that. It's going to be very much a deck that puts these big stats on board and then taunts them or silences them with something like Spellbreaker. If there's enough good silence targets in your opponent's decks as well, then we might well see that deck playing something like Spellbreaker and those kind of cards. Ironically, doing sort of what Purify Priest wants to do, but a little bit better, just because, well, it has Life Tap as a hero power, and that operates very well in a deck like that, allowing you to get out big Mountain Giants, big Twilight Drakes, and having the big con attack minions is actually a very good target for Faceless Shambler as well. So I think these are the kind of cards we could see in that deck, essentially like massive taunt deck. Yeah, I think that is definitely a deck we could see. I didn't really get around to building it, but it is something I will keep an eye out for and definitely give try at some point. But I'm very keen to try Zoo when Warlock comes out, and I think Warlock is going to be pretty good. I think that as long as Pyro Warrior isn't too dominant, and I think that might get shut down by other decks, then that might open the space for Zoo. Zoo, one of its biggest weaknesses is weapons, and that's why in the second Zoo deck we're even running the Bloodsail Corsairs. So I think that Zoo could be in a pretty good place, and Warlock therefore in a pretty good place. It's got definitely good tech cards to beat the control matchups, the Licari Sacrifice, which is maybe good enough just by itself in sort of standard Disco Zoo. Definitely something we're going to be trying out early on in the expansion. And yeah, I'm pretty excited for Zoo. Zoo in particular and Warlock overall. Let me know if there's any other Warlock decks you're thinking of. Maybe you think Licari Sacrifice is a must play. Or if you have any other questions regarding Zoo, regarding Warlock. So yeah, I kind of only think of it as Zoo going forward, but I definitely think that the handlock deck might be a thing. Yeah, so let me know if you have any questions or anything in the comments, or you can tweet at me. Please like and subscribe to help the channel grow, and give us motivation to keep doing videos like this. Thanks a lot. Cheers.